about to start turn number 10 here in Streets of Shadows. And we saw that the movie director recovered his headquarters. So the only faction that has lost and hasn't recovered its headquarters is the chief of police. And we've seen the cabaret impresario have the initiative during the last turns, and that advantage has translated in having many units throughout the board and controlling around 13 locations. But we haven't had any air raid card that would allow players to form alliances. So let's see if in these 2 turns that will happen. So the initiative still rests with the cabaret impresario, and he will be taking the actions in this turn first. On to the Shadows phase, and we reveal the next card in Deck B. And it is an air raid, and immediately players may form collaborations, and then the turn ends and the Allied Liberation marker will advance 1 space. Now you may ask yourself, well, how are you now going to conduct this particular mechanic in the game? You're playing the game by yourself. Yes, it is difficult. This game is not solo friendly, but the way I will do it, I will also randomize that process. So we will roll 1 die for each of the factions, and any 2 or 3 factions that roll the same result will be allied, and that's until we draw another air raid card. And let's see how that plays out. So we're going to roll all 5 dice. And we see here that the only pairs that we obtained were with the movie director and the fashion designer. And that's a weird alliance because the fashion designer just kicked out the movie director from the fashion designer's headquarters. But, you know, we're going to continue having these 2 sides allied to each other. And the way we signify this is by the use of these markers that the game brings. These markers have the letter A. There is another set of markers that have the letter B because there can be a maximum of 2 alliances concurrently in the game. So we give each of these players this A marker, so they are part of that collaboration or alliance. And there are various effects. Collaborators can trade action cards in francs, but not units. They do not hinder each other's movement from a district to another district. They can play action cards to counter for a targeted collaborator or to assist them when defending in combat. Now, collaborators cannot attack each other, but they can free one another's tokens from Gestapo prison. And another effect of this air raid card is that after collaborations have been formed, the turn ends. So now we advance the Allied Liberation marker 1 space. And it is now in the number 8 box of the Liberation track. So now we move on to turn 11. And we start with the initiative phase. And again, the cabaret impresario dominates the map, controlling 13 locations, and will have the initiative. Next is the Shadows phase. So we flip the top card in the Shadows deck, and it is Rommel in command immediately. If Allied Liberation is at 6, 7, or 8, move it back 1 space. Otherwise, no effect. In either case, the turn ends. And it is in box 8, so we move it back 1 space to 7, and turn 11 ends. So now we move on to turn 12, and turns are advancing fast. And again, we go to the initiative phase. The cabaret impresario has the initiative with 13 locations. Again, we go to the Shadows phase and pull the top card from the deck. another air raid immediately. Players may form collaborations, then the turn ends and the Allied liberation marker advances one space. So this has become a weird sequence of turns, and as we did before, we will recreate the forming of collaborations by rolling 5 dice, and any dice that are equal from one faction to another, they will be forming an alliance or collaboration. So we roll all 5 dice, and we have 3 5s. That's the Cabaret Impresario with the fashion designer and the chief of police. So we mark all 3 factions, starting with the Cabaret Impresario, the fashion designer, and the chief of police. For now, these are collaborators until the next air raid card. Now we advance the Allied liberation marker, which is in the 7 space, to the number 8 space. Now we move on to turn 13 in Streets of Shadows, and we determine initiative, and again, nothing has changed in terms of locations controlled by different factions. So the Cabaret Impresario, which is now allied to the fashion designer and the police chief, goes first. So now we proceed to the Shadows phase and draw the top card of the deck. And it is Allied Buildup in Britain. This Shadows card has no effect. You are about to embark upon the Great Crusade, toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. However, the Allied liberation marker will advance at the end of the turn. Now we move on to the income phase, and we have an alliance between the Cabaret Impresario, the fashion designer, and the chief of police. And it is during the income phase that these factions can trade cards and francs between themselves. But first, all factions collect income. After collecting income, the Cabaret Impresario has 8 francs, fashion designer has 7, followed by the journalist with 5, the movie director 4, and the chief of police 3. So what kind of negotiations could we expect of an alliance between the chief of police, the Cabaret Impresario, and the fashion designer? Well, if we look at the needs of the chief of police, the chief of police needs to expel the journalists who are not part of the alliance from the chief of police's former headquarters. The chief of police has a full hand of cards, and he can certainly trade some denunciation cards for any type of suited card. And it doesn't have to be a raid card, because the chief of police has the ability that any suited card that he has, he can treat it as a raids card. So the chief of police will be looking for suited cards among the newly formed alliance. The Cabaret Impresario only has 2 cards for now, a treachery and a raid card. And the fashion designer also has a full hand of cards. So he wants to get rid of some cards, but he would probably want to hold on to that precious raid card. So the chief of police will offer the Cabaret Impresario a denunciation card in exchange for a suited card. And we will separate one denunciation card from the chief of police. Cabaret Impresario knows that if he gives the chief of police this raid card, the chief of police will be doing the Cabaret's dirty work against the journalist. So they exchange cards, and the raid card goes to the chief of police. And the denunciation card is passed to the Cabaret Impresario. The fashion designer also has a problem. He has 4 cards, so he has a full set of cards. He could trade one of his cards in exchange for francs, so he will offer the Cabaret Impresario either a resistance or denunciation card. The Cabaret Impresario, not having a resistance card, will purchase the resistance card from the fashion designer, and that will be in exchange for 2 francs. And that is in exchange for 1 franc. So now the Cabaret Impresario has 3 cards and the fashion designer has room to purchase or bid for a new card. And that's all the negotiation here from Collaboration or Alliance A. On to the recruitment phase, and the player with the initiative, the Cabaret Impresario, has 3 cards, so he can only bring 1 new card. But remember that the Cabaret Impresario has that ability that he can discard 1 action card at the end of the bidding phase in case he doesn't like the cards that he has. In any event, he will purchase 1 unit, and that unit will be placed at the Cabaret Impresario's headquarters. Next is the fashion designer. He has complex dominance as well as the Cabaret Impresario, and he has a hand of 3 cards. A raid card, a denunciation, and a prison break card, which will surely come in handy during the next epoch of the game, which is D-Day, which is about to begin after this turn. So he's going to recruit heavily in this turn. He has 8 francs, so he spends 6 to purchase 3 units, places 2 here at the Paris Opera within striking distance of 2 Abwehr locations, 1 in Montmartre and 1 in the Tuileries. And the other unit is placed in the Eiffel Tower. Next is the movie director. He's seen how a 3-way alliance has been formed, so he can expect to be the target of attacks very soon. He just has 2 cards, and that raid card is not very encouraging for defense, so he will use his francs in order to purchase cards. Next is the chief of police. He has the necessary cards with which to try to recover his headquarters. Note that that treachery card doesn't add much to the attack. He still has 2 denunciation and 1 resistant card, but he can't keep on waiting. He has to take his headquarters back, and it may be during this turn he cannot purchase any cards, so he'll purchase another unit, and it'll be placed here at Notre Dame within striking distance of his former headquarters. Next is the journalist. He has space for 3 more cards in his hand, but he doesn't have a lot of income, just 5 francs. His treachery card in defense could provide a nasty sting if the police chief wants to attack now. So he has to decide what he's going to do with those 5 francs. And because he won't be able to move before the chief of police, he will save those francs to purchase cards, which hopefully will help him even more in defense. So on we go to the bidding phase. Here we see the cards up for auction: curfew, influence, raid, SOE contact, and a resistance card. All factions except the police chief will be able to bid. The police chief has a full hand of 5 cards. And here we see the results of the bidding. The movie director was able to take 2 cards, and the Cabaret Impresario took a raid card. Now it's the player turn phase. We start with the Cabaret Impresario. And the Cabaret Impresario moves 1 of his units from the train station at Montparnasse into the Latin Quarter, into the Sorbonne, and the other unit that was in the Sorbonne will move to the adjacent district of Bercy to his cabaret location there. He also moves his unit from Invalides in that same district to the Abwehr location there, and his unit at the Eiffel Tower to the adjacent Invalides district to the Invalides location. The Cabaret Impresario has mainly taken over more locations to ensure that he has the initiative throughout the game. That's the fashion designer's turn. These are the cards that he has. The SOE contact card is not playable. He doesn't control any railroad station. The prison break card is immaterial now. There's no units in prison. So he has these two cards, and he has a full set of 4 cards. So he will simply take his unit at Notre Dame and move it to the adjacent Tuileries district into the Avoir location there. Meanwhile, the fashion designer moves one of his units from the Paris Opera to the adjacent Montmartre district into the last remaining vacant Avoir location. Now it's the movie director's turn. He also has a full hand of 4 cards. A raid and an influence card, and 2 resistance cards, which will come in handy if the FFI event is declared soon. Now it's not a good time to attack the Cabaret Impresario because he belongs to an alliance collaboration with 2 other factions that could contribute cards in defense. The movie director wants to take his location there at Batignolles. It's being guarded by an elite unit of the police chief, and the movie director has 3 units here at Arc de Triomphe that could make it there. But again, the chief of police is in an alliance with 2 other factions, so it's not a good time to attack him either. The only other faction that is not in an alliance is the journalists. But the journalists are pretty strong in their headquarters at Batignolles. Next is the chief of police, and he wants to take his headquarters back. He has a full hand of 5 cards, and he is ready to attack that headquarters. He has the raid card to do it, and a treachery card to effect the attack. In addition, the chief of police has a special ability that any suited card is a raid card, but he won't have to use that ability this turn. So the chief of police moves his 6 units in Notre Dame at large into the Ile de la Cité district to signify that he will be attacking his former headquarters. Note that in this game, you don't have to actually physically move the units to place them in large. I just do so to facilitate observing that an attack is coming. They could have stayed from Notre Dame and made the attack from there. The chief of police will not add any more units. He has very few units in other important locations on the map. So the chief of police now plays cards. He will play the raid and treachery card. And again, in a face-to-face game, these are placed face down. So the journalist has to decide if he's going to play any card. He only has this number 3 card. And let's take a look at the situation. Notice that the chief of police has 6 cubes, so it's 6-2. So that 3 card would take the journalist total to 5. And that means that the journalist is going to lose irrespective of which action cards the chief of police played. So the journalist will not play any cards. The final score is 7-2. Journalist units are eliminated and the chief of police has retaken his headquarters. Now he has complex dominance. Now it's the journalist's turn. The chief of police has no cards left, so in a normal turn, he would be ripe for an attack by the journalist, but he's in an alliance with the fashion designer and cabaret impresario. So you could expect that they're going to at least provide some cards in defense. In addition, the journalist doesn't have an abundance of forces. So the journalist will stay put. Now we move on to the plot and resolution phase. This card has no effect, but the Allied Liberation marker advances 1 space. And the marker now enters the last stage of the game, D-Day. There's 4 more boxes to reach the Paris Liberated box. And now we introduce the C card deck. So we remove the unrevealed B cards, and we'll start in the next video with the C card or DDay deck. That's the end of this video in Streets of Shadows. Will the alliance between the cabaret impresario, fashion designer, and police chief continue, or will it dissolve? Will the Gestapo execute a crackdown, or the Free French will come into play? And we may see the play of denunciation and resistance cards. Stay tuned for the next episode of Streets of Shadows. And this is Stuka Joe signing off for now. Thanks for watching.